My beloved child, something changed the moment those words were spoken, and what happened afterward was not what anyone expected. Do not scroll away yet, because the most important part of this story is not what the third party heard. It is what your soulmate refused to take back. There was a moment when the room became strangely quiet. Not peaceful. Not comfortable. Just quiet enough for one sentence to carry more weight than an entire conversation. Your soulmate had been holding something inside for longer than anyone realized. They had tried to avoid confrontation. They had tried to keep their emotions hidden. They had tried to behave as though everything was normal, even when their heart was pulling them toward a truth they could no longer deny. Then the third party asked a question. They expected an ordinary answer. Instead, your soulmate said something that changed the atmosphere completely. And when those words landed, the third party's expression changed. Don't skip. Because those words were about you. For a long time, this third party believed they understood exactly where they stood. They believed enough time, enough distance, and enough outside influence could eventually weaken what your soulmate felt for you. They thought your absence would become their advantage. They thought silence meant your soulmate was forgetting. They thought uncertainty meant your place in your soulmate's heart was disappearing. But they misunderstood something very important. Silence was not erasing you. It was revealing you. Every day your soulmate tried to move forward without acknowledging what they truly felt, something kept bringing their thoughts back to you. A memory. A conversation. A particular expression on your face. A moment that seemed ordinary when it happened but became precious after distance entered the story. And slowly, your soulmate began realizing something they could no longer hide from themselves. What they felt for you had survived everything that was supposed to destroy it. Distance did not destroy it. Confusion did not destroy it. Outside opinions did not destroy it. Even the presence of another person could not completely silence it. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. The third party had sensed this before the conversation ever happened. They noticed the little things. They noticed how your soulmate became quieter whenever your name came close to the conversation. They noticed certain questions were avoided. They noticed your soulmate could discuss almost anyone casually, but something changed whenever the subject became you. There was history there. There was emotion there. And most importantly, there was something unfinished there. That frightened the third party more than they wanted to admit. Because people can compete with attention. They can compete with timing. They can even compete with circumstances. But it becomes much harder to compete with a connection that someone has finally admitted still matters. That is why the conversation became so important. The third party wanted reassurance. They wanted your soulmate to say that everything involving you belonged completely to the past. They wanted to hear that you no longer mattered. They wanted certainty. Instead, your soulmate gave them truth. And the truth sounded something like this. I can't pretend they meant nothing to me. Those words were enough. But your soulmate did not stop there. They continued. What I felt was real. Maybe I handled things badly. Maybe everything became complicated. But I'm not going to lie about what that person meant to me just to make somebody else comfortable. Silence. That was the moment everything changed. The third party had expected hesitation. They had expected your soulmate to minimize you. Instead, your soulmate protected the truth of what existed between you. And something inside the third party shifted. Not because your soulmate had promised you a future. Not because everything had suddenly been repaired. But because the third party finally understood something they had desperately tried not to see. You were not simply a memory. You were still emotionally significant. Don't skip now. The next part explains why their reaction became so intense. The third party had spent more time comparing themselves to you than your soulmate realized. They wanted to know what made you different. Why did certain memories involving you remain so vivid? Why could your soulmate become emotional over something that happened long ago? Why did your soulmate still remember tiny details about you? Why did certain songs, places, dates, jokes, and conversations still bring your presence back into their mind? The third party had been searching for an explanation. But the answer was not something they could measure. Your connection had depth. And depth cannot always be replaced simply because somebody new appears. This does not mean every complicated relationship automatically returns. It does not mean another person's emotions determine your destiny. But inside this fictional story, one thing had become impossible to deny. Your soulmate had stopped pretending. And that honesty changed the entire situation. The third party asked another question. Do you still think about them? Your soulmate hesitated. That hesitation alone said too much. The third party noticed. Answer me. Your soulmate looked away. Then came the words the third party had been afraid to hear. Yes. One word. That was all. Yes. Not every hour. Not every second. Not in some exaggerated fantasy. But yes. Your soulmate still thought about you. And then your soulmate added something even more revealing. I tried not to. That sentence carried a completely different meaning. Because thinking about someone intentionally is one thing. Trying not to think about someone and discovering they remain in your heart is another. The third party suddenly understood why certain moments had felt strange. Why your soulmate sometimes seemed distant. Why they occasionally stared at their phone without doing anything. Why certain conversations ended abruptly. Why your soulmate became defensive when someone criticized you too harshly. Pieces began connecting. And once they connected, the third party could not easily disconnect them again. Something huge is waiting for you, so stay till the end. Because what happened next was not shouting. It was something more revealing. The third party became unusually calm. Too calm. They stopped asking emotional questions and started asking specific ones. When did you last speak? Do you know what they're doing now? Would you answer if they contacted you? Would you ever meet them again? Your soulmate realized the conversation had changed. This was no longer curiosity. The third party was trying to understand whether the door between you and your soulmate was completely closed. And your soulmate refused to give them the answer they wanted. They said, I don't know what will happen. The third party immediately responded. But you want something to happen. Another silence. Your soulmate could have denied it. They could have laughed. They could have changed the subject. Instead, they said something softer. I just know I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if we had finally been honest with each other. That sentence landed differently. Because suddenly this was no longer about memories. It was about possibility. And possibility was exactly what the third party feared. They had believed the story between you and your soulmate had already ended. Now they realized your soulmate saw it differently. Maybe the ending had never actually been written. Maybe everything had simply stopped in the middle of a chapter. And unfinished chapters have a strange way of calling people back. Don't skip. Because this is where the story turns. After the conversation ended, the third party did not immediately reveal what they were thinking. They walked away carrying more questions than answers. But your soulmate could sense something had changed. Later, the third party began behaving differently. More observant. More curious. More interested in anything connected to you. They started paying attention whenever your soulmate used their phone. They became unusually interested when mutual friends were mentioned. They casually asked questions about the past. But those questions were not casual. They were gathering information. Not because some dark catastrophe was approaching, but because they were desperate to understand the connection they had just discovered was stronger than they assumed. And eventually, they formed a plan. A big one. The plan was simple in intention. They wanted your soulmate to choose. They no longer wanted ambiguity. They wanted a clear answer. Them. Or the possibility of you. But they made one critical mistake. They believed pressure would make your soulmate forget you. Instead, pressure forced your soulmate to examine their feelings more honestly. Your soulmate went home carrying that conversation inside their mind. They replayed every word. For perhaps the first time in a long while, they stopped asking, "How do I avoid this?" and started asking, "What do I actually want?" That question opened everything. Your soulmate remembered the beginning. The first time your presence felt different. The conversations that lasted longer than expected. The moments when neither of you needed to explain everything because somehow you understood each other. They remembered the misunderstandings too. The missed opportunities. The pride. The silence. The things both of you might have said differently if you had known how much they would matter later. And then your soulmate remembered the moment things changed between you. For months, they had told themselves one version of that story. They had convinced themselves there was nothing they could have done. But now another truth was emerging. They had been afraid. Afraid of vulnerability. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of choosing something meaningful without knowing exactly how it would end. So instead of stepping closer, they had allowed circumstances to create distance. That realization hurt. Because your soulmate finally understood that sometimes people do not lose meaningful connections because love disappears. Sometimes they lose them because fear speaks louder than honesty. Stay till the end. Because the third party's plan was about to create exactly the conversation they were hoping to prevent. The following day, they approached your soulmate again. Their voice was controlled. Their question was direct. "I need to know whether you're completely done with them." Your soulmate looked at them. For several seconds, nothing was said. Then your soulmate answered. "I can't give you that answer." The third party froze. Why? Your soulmate took a breath. "Because I don't know." That was when the third party lost their composure. Not violently. Not dangerously. Emotionally. All the insecurity they had been hiding suddenly surfaced. They wanted explanations. They wanted certainty. They wanted your soulmate to erase something your soulmate had finally decided to acknowledge. And your soulmate refused. "I won't disrespect you," they said. "But I also won't lie." That sentence changed everything. Because your soulmate had spent so much time avoiding uncomfortable truth that honesty itself had become an act of courage. The third party asked, "So if they came back tomorrow, what would you do?" Your soulmate did not answer immediately. Then, "I would listen." 3 words. I would listen. The third party heard possibility. Your soulmate heard honesty. And somewhere inside the distance between you, the story quietly shifted. Don't skip now, because the biggest reveal is still coming. The third party's big plan was not simply to demand an answer. They wanted to create a situation where your soulmate would finally prove where their heart stood. They considered arranging circumstances that would make avoiding the subject impossible. Maybe a gathering. Maybe a conversation involving mutual friends. Maybe bringing your name directly into a situation where your soulmate could no longer hide behind silence. The third party believed this would expose that your soulmate had exaggerated their feelings. But what they did not understand was that your soulmate had already begun making a decision privately. Not necessarily a decision to rush toward you. Something more mature. A decision to stop running from the truth. Your soulmate opened an old conversation. Your name appeared on the screen. They stared at it. Messages. Memories. Words that once seemed ordinary now carried an entirely different weight. Their thumb hovered over the screen. They almost typed something. Then stopped. Not because they had changed their mind. Because they wanted their next move to come from clarity rather than panic. For the first time, your soulmate did not want to return because they were lonely. They did not want to reach out because somebody had pressured them. They wanted to understand whether they were ready to communicate differently than before. That mattered. Because repeating the past would accomplish nothing. If another chapter ever opened between you, it could not be built on the same silence that closed the previous one. Your soulmate knew that. So they began asking themselves difficult questions. If I speak to this person again, am I prepared to tell the truth? Am I prepared to hear their truth? Can I apologize where I was wrong? Can I listen without defending myself? Can I accept that they may have changed? Can I accept that I may have changed too? Those questions transformed everything. The third party thought they were fighting against you. But your soulmate was actually fighting against their own fear. And that battle had been happening long before the third party ever entered the picture. Something huge is waiting for you. Because there was one sentence your soulmate had not yet spoken aloud. One sentence they kept repeating privately. If I get one real chance to talk to them again, I don't want to waste it. That was the sentence. Not a dramatic promise. Not an impossible guarantee. A chance. A conversation. Honesty. That was what your soulmate wanted. And strangely, the third party's attempt to force you out of the story had made your soulmate understand why you remained inside it. The more pressure they applied, the clearer your soulmate became. The more they demanded that your soulmate deny the past, the more your soulmate remembered why the past mattered. The more they tried to make your soulmate choose from fear, the more your soulmate wanted to choose from truth. Then came another unexpected moment. Someone who knew both sides of the situation spoke privately with your soulmate. They said, "You know, this isn't really about choosing between two people." Your soulmate looked confused. "What do you mean?" The person continued. "It's about choosing whether you're going to keep living according to what everybody expects from you, or finally admit what you actually feel." Your soulmate became silent. Because those words went deeper than the third-party situation. This had always been your soulmate's struggle. Expectation versus truth. Safety versus vulnerability. Appearance versus emotion. They had spent so much time trying to make the correct decision that they had forgotten to ask whether it was an honest decision. And suddenly they remembered you again. Not as perfection. Not as fantasy. As someone around whom they once felt emotionally seen. That memory mattered. Stay till the end. Because the third party was about to discover something they could never control. Your soulmate's inner world. They could ask questions. They could demand answers. They could create pressure. They could compare themselves to you. But they could not rewrite your soulmate's memories. They could not decide what your soulmate felt. They could not manufacture closure where closure had never truly happened. And slowly, the third party understood that. Their big plan began changing. Instead of trying to force your soulmate to erase you, they decided they wanted one final answer. They planned to ask your soulmate whether there was still something unfinished between you. No vague answers. No avoiding. No changing subjects. Just truth. Your soulmate sensed the question was coming. And instead of fearing it, they began preparing themselves to answer. That is the part nobody expected. The person who once avoided discussing you was now preparing to speak openly about you. The person who once buried their feelings was beginning to name them. The person who once believed distance would solve everything had discovered distance had only made certain truths louder. But there was still one mystery. What would your soulmate actually say when confronted? That answer arrived sooner than expected. The third party finally asked. If you could tell them one thing right now, and you knew they would actually listen, what would you say? Your soulmate's expression changed. This question was different. There was no easy answer. They looked down. Several seconds passed. Then your soulmate spoke slowly. I would tell them I'm sorry for the things I never explained. The third party said nothing. Your soulmate continued. I would tell them some of my silence wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I cared and didn't know what to do with it. Another pause. And I would tell them that whatever happens from here, I hope they know they mattered to me more than I ever showed. The third party stared at them. That was the moment. That was what caused everything hidden beneath the surface to come rushing upward. Because those were not the words of someone who felt nothing. Those were the words of someone carrying unfinished emotion. Don't skip. Your soulmate still had one more sentence. And this sentence was the one that truly changed the direction of the story. They said, and if life ever gives us another honest conversation, I'm not running from it again. There it was. No promise of an ending. No guarantee. Just courage. The willingness to face what had once been avoided. The third party walked away from that conversation understanding something they had resisted from the beginning. Whatever existed between you and your soulmate could not simply be ordered to disappear. If it was going to end, it needed truth. If it was going to begin again, it needed truth. Either way, truth had become unavoidable. And now your soulmate was finally ready for it. Something huge is waiting for you, because while the third party was making their next move, your soulmate was quietly making one of their own. Later that evening, your soulmate picked up their phone. They opened your name again. This time they did not immediately close it. They sat there remembering everything. Then they began typing. A sentence appeared. They deleted it. They typed another. Deleted that too. Finally, they wrote something simple. Something honest. Something that did not pressure you. Something that did not pretend the past had never happened. Their finger hovered over the send button. And for the first time, fear was not the loudest voice in the room. But before they could decide what to do, another notification appeared. Your soulmate looked at the screen. Their expression changed instantly. Because the message was from the third party. And what the third party had written revealed that their big plan had already begun. Your soulmate read the message once. Then twice. They slowly lowered the phone. Because suddenly they understood that the next decision could change the direction of everything. And what they chose to do next was something even the third party never expected. Don't skip the next part. Stay till the end. Because the real question is no longer whether your soulmate still remembers you. That answer has already become clear. The real question is what the third party has planned, why your soulmate refuses to play along, and what message is now sitting unfinished on your soulmate's screen with your name above it. Something huge is waiting for you. And this story has only reached the moment where everything begins to turn.